Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. They are Daniel Gallen and Mark Brennan joining me for another episode. We got a lot to get to as we covered on Sunday with an emergency podcast. We broke down the fact that James Franklin is no longer the leader of these Nittany Lions. For the first time since 2013, they're going to head into a matchup without James Franklin as the head football coach. He has moved on. We'll learn what's next for him in some time. We'll learn what's next for Penn State as their coaching search continues. But initially, it's going to be interim head coach Terry Smith, longtime cornerbacks coach here, one of the first hires that James Franklin made back in 2014. We heard from him today at a press conference in the Beaver Stadium media room. We also heard from Pat Kraft, the athletic director, who ultimately made this decision for a coaching move here in Happy Valley. We're going to get to a lot of that, but first, we have not heard from Mark Brennan. You have not, at least, and Daniel and I got together for about 40 minutes or so on Sunday evening. I hope you caught that one, our emergency podcast, with initial reactions, talking about what comes next, the coaching search a little bit. But Mark, the microphone is yours here. We haven't spoken with you since last Thursday, and obviously much has changed here in State College since last Thursday.
Yeah, I'm back in my workroom here, and on the chairs behind me, there are blankets from like sleeping in this room over the last couple of days, just because so much was going on. I mentioned it to you guys during the game. I mean, I think we all were struck by how few people were in the stands 30 minutes out, by what happened with the student section as the game was kind of winding down. But the thing that was really jarring to me, and I wrote about this a couple times, was you may have heard that the press box accommodations are kind of cramped. And when you're as old and tall as I am, you try to get up and walk around a little bit. And between the third and fourth quarter, I went out on a little deck that's by the press box, and you could see out to the roads leading out of the stadium. And I was stunned. It was a trail of taillights. You know, Penn State's leading this game 14-13 at that point, albeit with Northwestern about to score. I mean, they just had the turnover, but that's when I think we all had to sense that this wasn't going to end well. But that's when it kind of hit me that the fans are bailing on this team. And, as much discussion as there's been about the boos, I think that was even a more startling, stunning sign. This is homecoming. You have one game in 42 days in Beaver Stadium. And that was it. So to me, that's the moment where, maybe I should have realized it sooner that this was over. It was just a matter of when it was going to be over. I don't know. Number one, I don't know how you could bring recruits in there and hear the reaction that you're going to get for when James Franklin is introduced. And you have to be wondering, I don't think they're going to say anything negative, but in the back of their heads, you have to be wondering what's going on. And then the way the game unfolded, again, a team finding ways to lose. Good teams find ways to win. This team is finding ways to lose. Painful, excruciating, just, and for the players, the coaches, then and the fans, and apparently the athletic director, right? And the way that unfolded, and then Franklin's body language afterward. And then the fact that I give him all the credit in the world for doing this. He had been walking through the tunnel with his daughter and his wife, or at least his daughter, for so many games. And they met him in the tunnel, and he said, "No, you guys go ahead." He knew it was coming. I mean, you could see it on Brennan cam. He had them go ahead, and that had to be a painful moment for him and for them, but it was a smart thing to do. And that's when it sets in even more, this is over. It's just a matter of when. And then we get into the media room, and typically Franklin has several members of his family and friends there. And at this instance, there was more people than I had ever seen. And then I'm like, yeah, this is over. It's just a matter of when. And I didn't know when it was going to happen. And in all candor, I don't know if you guys discussed this, but late Saturday night, early Sunday morning, the discussion was had among us, we have to write this. I don't think I don't think I'm violating anything here. We have to get this ready to go. And so Daniel got it ready to go, and we kind of envisioned how it would happen. And as it turned out, it happened that very way. And the fact that it happened that quickly, initially I was a little surprised, but then the more I thought about it, the more I thought, there's no way that team was winning at Iowa. It just wasn't going to happen. I mean, we've been to Iowa enough times, and then you're looking at Ohio State, and then you're looking at. I mean, you just saw this team was defeated. It was emotionally drained. And does this give them a better opportunity to win those games? I don't know. I would say, yeah, at least at Iowa, just because some sort of change was needed. But to me, it was time to do it. If it was going to happen and it was going to happen, we could argue, people could come down on either side of whether he should have been fired or whether he shouldn't. And there are very passionate voices on both sides of it. But I don't know that anybody could argue that it was over. I don't think they were pulling out of this, right? I don't know if they were ever pulling out of this. So the decision was made, and we can get into what Pat Kraft had to tell us, but I think it was the best way to go about implementing the decision that they made and getting it done, pulling the Band-Aid off as quickly as possible and letting everybody try to move ahead. There's enough of this season left that the players can still make something of it. And you're putting a beloved coach and Terry Smith in charge of everything. It's the best possible thing that they can do. I mean, making chicken salad out of you know what. So those are my overall thoughts. It was time, and here we are.
Yeah, we will get to some of the Terry Smith commentary in a bit. I thought he was fantastic and really what you would hope for from his debut press conference in this particular role. Going back to something you said, Mark, will they be a better performing team on Saturday night? We don't know, but this is currently a team that no longer has the guillotine hanging over their heads. It happened. It fell. The head coach is fired. Everyone's had to digest that. Everyone's got to emotionally bounce back in their own way, take some pride individually, take some pride collectively, as we discussed on Sunday. And Daniel, bringing you into the conversation, Pat Kraft, I thought was fairly transparent in terms of what his thought process was about James Franklin, not just, waking up on Sunday morning and heading to the Lash building and walking up those stairs to deliver some terrible news to Franklin, but really where his mindset may have been when he showed up to Beaver Stadium on Saturday afternoon for the Northwestern matchup. You handled our breakdown of everything that he had to say on Monday over at Lions247.com. So just starting with the firing process before we talk about the hiring process, which comes next, what were the top takeaways for you?
Yeah, I think the thing that stood out to me the most was Pat Kraft saying that this wasn't a 3-game thing, that this had been, it sounds like something that had been on his mind as a possibility. When he was pressed on it a little bit, he did kind of fall back on the idea of like, well, I'm the boss. It's my job to be prepared for anything to happen at any time. That's part of the job. But I thought that was really interesting. And, I do think that we felt things were different after Oregon, the way that happened. But we also think that given the amount of equity that James Franklin has built up, the amount of time that he's been here, it would be hard to imagine just pulling the plug after a 3-game losing streak like we just saw. So that was the first thing that really stood out to me from Kraft in terms of the process. He's really owning this. I think that was something else that stood out to me. There was a lot of talk about being a leader, and being a leader means that you have to make tough decisions and you have to be the one that gets it right. I do think that that's what you want to hear after someone made a decision of this magnitude. Not someone, maybe hiding behind the collective or putting, the onus on someone else in terms of making that decision. I think that he's taking responsibility for it and moving forward. I think that was something else that really stood out to me too. The buyout did come up, and that's where, no answer on that. He said that he didn't want to discuss financials, get into that. Then he said he wanted to be transparent about everything else that was going on in terms of the firing. So, I think that his, sort of overall opening statement, I think he touched on all the beats, talked about what his job is, what his responsibility is to Penn State. Talked a lot about what James Franklin did for the program, what he means to the university, a ton of praise for him. But the undercurrent is that Kraft wants to win a national championship, feels like he gave the coach all the tools, all the investment that he needed to win a national championship, and that wasn't going to happen with James Franklin. So it was time for a change.
Hey,
And
the irony,
publicly,
guys,
yeah.
the irony is that Franklin worked for so long to get what he called alignment, and he thought he found it, and I think he did find it with Pat Kraft and Neely Bendapudi, the president. I think they were like-minded in the kind of investment that had to be made. But again, the irony is that, ultimately the people that he felt he was in best alignment were the only ones who were mentioned on the press release announcing his dismissal. And so, yeah, everybody's aligned for one goal, and now he's not part of it.
Yeah, Kraft told us that he wanted to sleep on it Saturday night. It sounds like he knew where he was going to land on the decision when he woke up, and it stuck with him when he woke up. And he said it was the course that he needed to take for the program, for the locker room. And at this time, it was the right move, in his opinion, as the leader of this athletic department. He did reference trajectory, as Daniel talked about, not just a 3-game sample size. And just throwing it back to you real quick, Mark, on this, that mention of trajectory, that I said, even before I threw it to Daniel there, that this seemed like there was a seed in his mind that they maybe needed a brace for something like this over the course of the 2025 year. We talked about it, the all-in approach. It was either going to succeed and it was going to be a home run success for everybody. And if it fell short of expectations, there were going to be repercussions. And James Franklin was the most likely candidate for those repercussions to land on. Based on what you heard from Pat today, do you feel like he entered this season knowing that if things got shaky, he was probably going to be in the hunt for a new football coach?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we all realize that, right? But I don't think we realize it going this way. I think most of us figured if they get to the end of the year and they have, losses to Ohio State, Oregon, and somebody else, that's the decision would have been made then. I would have never believed that they would have lost these last 2 games. And it's just an indicator. And the other thing that I've written, and I think it's important to note, it's like, yeah, you want to win national titles, but when you're looking up and seeing empty seats, those seats are paid for, but those people may not come back if you don't make some sort of change. And when you're reaching out to the same people over and over for boosting ticket prices, boosting capital donations, coming with your hat in hand for NIL money, over and over and over, even though the university is going to be able to start paying some of that. I mean, all those things have to come in play where, again, the vocal crowd is one thing, but the apathy is another. So the one thing about Kraft is he comes across as kind of a happy-go-lucky guy, but no, he's calculated. I mean, you don't get to where he is by not having a game plan, by not expecting the unexpected. And I genuinely believe he likes Franklin. I do. I don't think that's fake at all. But I also genuinely believe he came to realize what most of us were coming to realize, that this wasn't going to happen under James Franklin. I mean, the numbers bear it out. The CBS research team, Pat Foley, sent us all these great stats, 1-18 and 15 straight against top 10 in the Big Ten, 15 straight losses to the top 10. Was it something like that? I mean, all these numbers, and then when you're not only not winning the games that against top 10 opponents, but you're now all of a sudden you're losing the games you're supposed to win. That's jarring. So yeah, I think he absolutely, Tyler, had a plan going into the season, not maybe expecting this very thing, but probably just had to act on it a little quicker.
And I think reading between the lines with some of what Pat Kraft said and what he was picking up from the trajectory of the locker room of the program, some of the things that Terry Smith later said about how he wants this team to play, it wasn't just the scoreboard. It was the style of which the Penn State played, lost, looked lethargic at times, looked dispirited at times. We're talking about 6 games into what was supposed to be a national championship March for this program. And so, yeah, very difficult for a lot of people to realize this in this moment, and certainly Pat Kraft as well. But he makes the decision, and now you turn the page a bit here and you focus in on what comes next. And of course, that means hiring your next head coach. He did tell us that Terry Smith is going to be considered as a candidate. I asked him directly to finish off the press conference. He confirmed that will be the case. He said he wants to do everything within his power to help Terry Smith run the table from here on out. And we'll see if we're going to get to more on Terry Smith, but we'll see what he can do with this opportunity. It's a big one for him. But Daniel, big picture, he talked about it being a nationwide search. He kind of laid out the blueprint for what he's looking for in the perfect candidate. What were some of the bullet points from that part of the press conference that stood out to you?
Yeah, I mentioned this to you guys kind of tongue in cheek, but the ideal candidate he's describing sounds a lot like James Franklin when when they were hiring him, however many years ago that was. Yeah, if Kraft said that it's going to be a national search, this was another thing that in the press release it said that he will conduct it. I think there were some we's and some I's mixed in from him today when talking about it. Unfortunately, the didn't get the chance for the question to come up about who else is going to be involved in this during his press conference. I think that's something to keep in mind in terms of different stakeholders and all of that, different voices that you can have throughout this process. But I think Kraft, he kind of hit the Penn State trifecta in terms of buzzwords when talking about what he wanted to look for. He said integrity, accountability, toughness, humility, elite motivator. He mentioned, I think, someone that could be blue collar, getting back out there. Let's see, achieve excellence at the highest level. Recruiting will always be a pillar. And he wants someone that can be a modern coach. He mentioned NIL a couple times. He mentioned the transfer portal. He mentioned utilizing the resources that Penn State is going to give this coach, to do those things, to be a part of that. So I think in terms of the coach that Kraft laid out, I think that it is the ideal coach for Penn State. It does hit all these different benchmarks. Now, who is out there that really does fit every single one of these criteria? I don't really know if there's someone that is made in the lab to be a Penn State coach, but we'll see exactly how it goes. I mean, I know that these things can change over time. I know that a lot of people aren't interested in hearing about the 2015 Maryland coaching search, but that began with the athletic director saying we want a really offensive, exciting, young coach, and they ended up hiring a defensive coordinator from Michigan at the end of it. So your process can change as you go through these things. But I think right now, Pat Kraft laid out that he wants someone who really fits the Penn State identity. That I think we all know what that means, and then wants someone that wants to win championships and can win championships too.
Early on, and I stress early on because this process is just underway, but the feedback that we've heard and some of the things we've observed indicate that Penn State's in a pretty good situation from a cash standpoint. I know people think that they're broke now because they're going to have to pay James Franklin to walk away. That kind of stuff tends to sort itself out when people who have deep pockets step up and help you with the process. And I know that Penn State fans and the Penn State administration and James Franklin at different times in public settings have been clamoring for some of those deeper pocketed Penn State community members to do a little bit more for the football program. That may be happening right now. There may be an area of a sector of this fan base who has that kind of power they can wield financially that see this as an opening where they can really impact change. They can make their imprint on this program moving forward. And with that in mind, Mark, I think Pat Kraft is clearly going to go big game hunting here. You don't fire James Franklin right now to go find some bargain solution. We mentioned a few names on our Sunday emergency podcast. We talked about the obvious one and Matt Rule and his ties to this area, his ties to Pat Kraft. We talked about Curt Cignetti here in the Big Ten and what he has done with Indiana in a short period after doing great things with James Madison before that. We even threw out the name Urban Meyer, which I continue to hear may be in play here moving forward. Mark, there's a bunch more names that we have on our hot board at lions247.com. We'll continue to add to them. We need to note that Terry Smith is part of that mix as well. But what is your early read on this, and how hard is it to ignore the Matt Rule stuff?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, he mentioned that the athletic department is going to pay for the entire buyout. Now, I mean, we're hearing that it's $50 million. I mean, but he didn't blink on that, did he? I mean, it didn't look like he was remotely fazed by that. But yeah, I mean, I think that's another reason why you do it now. You have a guy like Terry Smith, who again is very respected within the program and can guide you through, but now he can set out, doing what he needs to do. And we know how these things go. I mean, no current coach is going to say, yeah, that Penn State job's really attractive to me. And this is all done through agents. I mean, this is all done through their representatives. And Lord knows we've seen it enough with Franklin when he was being courted by other people. So he has to be detailed and methodical and, all of those things. But I would think he would be selling himself in Penn State short if they didn't aim as high as they could possibly aim. And, what does that mean? Does that mean Matt Rule? It could be. State college guy, happened to play football with my brother-in-law, so it wouldn't be a bad thing for probably us if that happened. Manny Diaz, I mean, how much was he respected when he was here? So, yeah, I think we saw the Jim Knowles thing hasn't worked out immediately the way everybody thought it was going to work. But I think if you use the way that he approached that, going for the biggest possible name, that could be kind of a template. And again, I don't mean that in the sense that go out and get somebody who's not going to really produce in the first year. I think it's more about, hey, what are you willing to pony up? What are you willing to do? And in that instance, they were willing to do everything they needed to do. And I think if you translate that to a head coaching search, it's just going to be magnified. And I think they are going to be willing to do whatever they need to do. The question is going to be, after seeing the way Franklin exited, will other people be, will other coaches, be worried about, hey, I'm going to lose 3 games and lose my job? It's been my, not necessarily at Penn State, but just in following sports for a long time, it's been my experience that coaches usually don't worry about that because they all think they're better than everybody else, and it's not possibly going to happen to them. So, yeah, I don't think they could set the bar too high. I think they have to go after whoever the best of the best might be.
And as we've discussed on Sunday, and the three of us kind of discussed on our text thread in the recent hours, it's like this move is not going to be made publicly anytime soon. There is, unless they're going for someone who is currently out of football. We mentioned Urban Meyer. If you want to go down that Nick Saban road, have fun with that one. But in terms of people who are currently employed and coaching their own teams and responsible for their own staffs and locker rooms, you're still looking at post-Thanksgiving for when that kind of stuff shifts and guys will actually make some moves and stuff starts to leak in public. So there's going to be a lot going down at Lions247.com. We have 60% off going on right now because we want to welcome you in for this. It's kind of a fresh start for the program. If you haven't laid eyes on our coverage, period, at Lions 24/7, it's a good opportunity to do that. Mark, did you want to chime in? Because I saw the microphone lifting.
Well, no, I mean, the wild thing is going to be Cignetti and Rule are both going to be here like this season. I mean, talk about I almost said the wrong word at that point, but talk about a circus. Talk about a circus coming to town. Even if they both deny that they did anything, nobody's going to believe them, and so it is going to be wild when that happens. So when you talk about the 60% off special, this is for an annual pass. I'm telling you, folks, buckle in. This is going to be a wild few weeks, and there's going to be ups and there's going to be downs. It's going to be a roller coaster of recruiting and roster retention and everything else. And like I said, when early November, when Cignetti comes to town, and then when Rule comes rolling into his hometown, it's going to be wild, but it's going to be fun, and it's going to be at least better than a dead man walking to the end of a season that it looked like we were looking at. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way to James. I mean that I think the writing was on the wall that even if it didn't happen yesterday, as we taped this Monday, even if it didn't happen Sunday, it was going to happen at some point.
Yeah, and you mentioned recruiting there. I promise we're not burying that, but we will get to it in a big way with Tyler Calvaruso midweek. We're going to let him kind of come up for air at some point, catch his breath, and let us know what the hell is happening. But there have been 5 decommitments. I think 3 or 4 other players have said, I'm not decommitted, but my recruitment's reopened. So there's a lot going on right now. Their 2027 class, which was ranked number 1 in the nation, I think about a week or so ago, currently has 0 commits in it. So things are happening fast. And Pat Kraft had a line for us, said he is not all that worried about the 27 commits right now or 27 recruits right now. He's worried about the locker room, the guys who are currently on this campus. And not to mention, when they find a head coach, Mark, the action will continue at Lions 24/7 because that head coach is going to have to fill out an entire staff. We'll see if they maybe have a general manager on the next staff. And, oh, by the way, roster moves, transfer portal moves, coming in, coming out. We're going to see a lot of changes here at Penn State. That comes with the territory. That's what happens when you make a move like they did. Daniel, let's get over to Terry Smith, because not to be lost in all the shuffle and all the marquee names out there in the coaching search, you've got a guy here who's been a great soldier for Nittany Lions football for a long time. Mark covered him as a player, as a receiver. I want to get some more context from Mark in a moment. But Daniel, this was his first chance to step in front of a microphone as the interim head coach, as the guy who's at the top of the pyramid for now, at least the next 6 games. As we said, Pat Kraft left that door open for him to be evaluated for the full-time position. But Terry Smith's a guy that we've interacted with a bunch over the years. Great conversation, cornerbacks coach. He's also been the recruiting coordinator on defense. And so there have been plenty of opportunities to talk with him about things, but not like this. He led off his press conference, and I wasn't surprised by this, but right away going to James Franklin, what James Franklin has meant to him, what James Franklin has meant to this program. He said he brought it out of a dark age and brought the program back where it needs to be. And then Terry Smith started to put his own stamp on his press conference and talk about his vision. What stood out to you from a very different opportunity for us to speak with Terry Smith?
I think you laid it out really nicely there, Tyler, where he was deferential to James Franklin and gave him a lot of praise. He said that they had talked last night. He also said that they'd talked in the past where it was, if anything were to happen to Franklin, it was going to be Terry Smith's job, which I thought was interesting. But then he also really did look forward. And I think that he didn't necessarily call things out directly, but it sounds like he's been watching the same football team that the rest of us have been watching and the rest of the fan base has been watching. And that's not something you always get from a coach. Sometimes coaches say stuff and you're like, what are you guys watching on film? Like, we're seeing something completely different. But I thought Terry Smith, he struck a couple chords out there. He talked about returning to grittiness. He talked about this week the focus being on the offensive and defensive line, improving the play there in the trenches, because everything starts there and goes outward. And then he also talked about having fun again. And I think that that's something too to think about, where this didn't seem like a team that was playing with a lot of joy these past couple of weeks, even in the non-conference when they were blowing teams out. I think you did see maybe early in the Oregon game, you saw some of that in that whiteout atmosphere, being able to feed off of that, which is just so unique. But especially you go out to LA, have a flat performance, Northwestern, just no juice type of performance. I think that was pretty, astute by Terry to point out that, hey, this is an area we need improvement here. And I think that looking at intangibles, I think that's something that can really lift this team right now. So yeah, I mean, I thought he hit all the right notes. I thought there was a level of honesty that we got from him in some areas that I think we'll talk about, and it just felt different, from a James Franklin presser. I know we talked about this a little bit, where we regard Smith as Franklin's right-hand man. I mean, they've been together the whole time here. We know that Smith knows how Franklin wanted things done, how he did things, but this didn't sound like an extension of a Franklin tenure. This sounded like something new, someone that wants to fix things and knows what things need to be fixed.
Yeah. And he also mentioned he probably recruited about 3/4 of the entire roster. It's not just the cornerback room with Terry Smith. His name shows up a lot in these recruiting efforts if you followed our coverage at Lions 24/7 over the last several years. And Mark, as I mentioned, you covered Terry as a player. You've gotten to know him quite well throughout his 12 years as an assistant coach. Now he ascends to the interim head coach position. What's most intriguing about this opportunity for Terry Smith and for the Penn State team in these next 6 games for you?
Here's the thing, though, about Terry Smith. He is as loyal can be. He was an outstanding quarterback at Gateway High in Monroeville. And as people in Pennsylvania know, when he was a player and then a coach there, they were very, very good. After his playing career, he went into some other things, and he became a long-time coach at Gateway. Long time. And then he became athletic director and coach. He's got ties all over Pennsylvania. And when people talk about, when he was talking about recruiting kind of a quarter or 3/4, that's not an understatement. I mean, our recruiting guys track who's recruiting everybody. And when we ask, like, who may be recruiting, certain guys who are coming on visits, oh yeah, that's a Terry Smith guy, Terry Smith. So the loyalty he had to Gateway, he was there for years and years and years as a coach and AD. And then I think he had 1 year as an assistant at Temple. And then he comes back to his alma mater with James Franklin, and he's been here ever since, even though it's been a revolving door of all these other coaches. His dad went to Penn State. His son, Justin King, graduated from Penn State. When he was at Gateway, he was coaching elite players like Justin King, several kids who committed to Ohio State. So this guy is loyal. He's used to being around great players. And if you talk to people within the program, if you talk to them from when he arrived until now, he is one of the most beloved coaches in there. And I think that's also one of the really smart things that Pat Kraft did, that everybody knows who Terry Smith is. They all know what he's about. We watched him going through that violent wrap and roll drill during the bye week. And the thing that stood out to me is like he was coaching defensive players, offensive players, you name it. He's yelling at all of them, cursing at half of them, having fun, joking with the rest of them. So just a down-to-earth, direct. He's known for having very frank discussions. For in his room, you're going to know exactly where you stand, and that's going to be important at this moment. And then the other thing is he's their defensive recruiting coordinator, and so not only is he recruiting a certain position or a certain area or certain areas for him now, they move him all over the place, but he has a great perspective of recruiting overall, and he probably has relationships with so many of these guys. So he's the perfect guy to fit in here. I mean, at this juncture, and it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. If they end up, I was texting with you guys, and sometimes you guys won't believe the stupid stuff we text about, but sometimes an idea actually forms by one or more of us. And, it occurred to me, if he somehow goes on a 3-game winning streak here, it's going to get really, really interesting. It's going to get really, really interesting. I know I'm not taking it one game at a time, but something to definitely think about. If they're able to get past Iowa and then, somehow sneak past Ohio State, these are all big ifs, but it's going to be fun to see what happens if he's able to do that, because I wish nothing but the best for him. And if he doesn't get the job, I would not be surprised if he's one of the guys who ends up being a holdover.
You talked about him being a direct person in conversation. I think James Franklin at some time called him like the ultimate truth teller. He maybe told James some things that no one else in the building was willing to go and tell the head coach to his face, but he does it in a very mild-mannered, calm and controlled way. He doesn't scream it at you, which I think is even more effective, and especially in this setting right now where guys are feeling pretty fragile after James Franklin's firing and kind of feeling like for some of them, you're taking a father figure out of the building, a guy who was in your living room as a high school kid, made a lot of promises, kind of navigated you through some tough times in college, and now he's out the door and he's no longer welcome in the building for right now. And so, Daniel, when we get
real
to that
quick,
part
former players, Tyler,
it's
just hitting me now. Former players, whether from the last 12 years or whether from his tenure and even after his tenure, I mean, former players loved this dude, and not all former players get along, but we've seen him at camps with Bobby Ingram, who showed up, or when we've seen LeVar around, he's buddies with my close friend Goon, different generations. He's kind of somebody that when this change was made going to Franklin, after Bill O'Brien, I thought it was genius for Franklin to bring in a former player. And remember, now we see former players all over the place at Penn State, right? That was kind of a unique thing for him to do. And I think it was great to bridge the gap that was there to other former players, because Terry's so beloved by all of them as well.
We talk about glue guys in sports and all those conversations. He's a glue guy for this staff. He's a glue guy for this program. And they need that when they made the decision they did on Sunday. I'll also note that along with his son, Justin King, and his father being Penn State graduates, and himself, of course, his daughter recently graduated from the university. So plenty of family ties.
She's a great story too, guys. She is an unbelievable story.
Yeah, absolutely. And Daniel, I want to get to the football aspect of this, because we've kind of gone over the personality impact and who Terry Smith is and what he's getting to do right now. But he has some things to fix, because last time we saw this team, they were losing 3 straight. They looked relatively lifeless along the way. They also lost their starting quarterback. We'll talk about the QB situation to close out the episode in a little while. But Daniel, I think one quote before I throw it to you on this subject, Terry Smith was asked about his definition of success moving forward, because I don't think anyone's expecting a 6-0 run here. Mark brought it up. It's going to be interesting if they get to that point. And Pat Kraft said they want to do everything they can to help him get to that point. But he said his definition of success is, quote, the team pulling the rope in the same direction. When you watch us play, your questions won't be about effort. Your questions won't be that they look lethargic. If we lose, it's going to be because that team beat us and they were just better. And when you're coming off losses against a couple teams where you were a 3-touchdown plus favorite, you can't really make the argument that the team across the way was just a better squad than you. There's a lot to look at internally and what went wrong for Penn State here. Terry Smith had some tough love in this press conference, and I think he really set the standard for how he is going to try to approach and maybe shake this team out of its funk.
Yeah, I think lethargic is a really good word when you talk about the past 2 weeks and what we saw from Penn State at UCLA and then against Northwestern. But yeah, I thought that a thing that was very telling and I think sets the tone a little bit from Terry Smith was he got asked about what happened to AJ Harris on Saturday. I know that in the press box, that's something that we were talking about a little bit. Harris goes out after giving up that touchdown pass. I think it was a 29-yarder in the first half. Did not see him again. And up in the press box, that's a very high on the question priority list when it happens. But then by the time we get down to the press room and everything that happened, it falls down the pecking order a little bit. But our colleague Greg Pickle from BWI asked Terry, what happened there? And I think that some of us were expecting a little bit of a non-answer or an injury update or, maybe we'll talk about this later or whatever. Terry Smith came out straight away and said that he felt after that play that Elliott Washington and Aldavian Collins gave them the best chance to win. And for someone that came into the year as he was another guy that we labeled as that potential,
Don't do it.
that potential first defensive back to go in the first round. We had a lot of high hopes for. It was, I think, a bit of a surprise, and I think and it sheds a window into the fact that there are a lot of guys on this team underachieving. We had talked about wanting to see accountability because James Franklin had talked a lot about that. Now we have an example of it in terms of a very prominent player. And I think Smith coming out and just laying that out, I think it sets the tone for what things are going to look like moving forward. We hear it, like we talked about earlier, Franklin called Smith a big truth teller, and he came out in this opening presser and gave us the truth on something. We'll see what else we learn moving forward and other things like that. But I think that is a good window into what Terry Smith sees that he wants to fix, how he wants this team to play, and what they're going to be willing to do to reach that.
We'll be on the practice field Wednesday as usual, but we don't know if it'll look a little bit different. I don't think they're going to rewrite how they organize practice and go period to period necessarily, but who's at the front of those position lines, especially when it comes time for this game on Saturday night and you guys are up there in Kinnick Stadium in the press box with your binoculars. Are we looking at some different starters at different positions because of the evaluation of a new head coach and maybe ripping off the Band-Aid a little bit with how he's handling these situations? He talked about, needing to, sitting down and playing, talking to players and being like, look, you signed up to play football. We signed up to coach. Let's go do that. Let's actually go and execute and do the best we can. There's a question about, are there going to be guys who take a step back and take a red shirt and essentially say, I'm done with Penn State. I'll move on from the program after the year, but don't play me anymore. And so we're going to learn a lot about the guts on some of this team. And it's going to start with Terry Smith and how he's kind of setting the tone up top. And before we say goodbye to our audience here, I want to shift it over to Drew Aller and eventually Ethan Grunkemeyer at quarterback, because not only are we in very different territory for Penn State without James Franklin on the sideline, but they're going to have a different starting quarterback for the first time since Sean Clifford won Rose Bowl MVP out in Pasadena, one of the first days of 2023. Mark, last we saw Drew Aller, he was being carted off the sideline. A bit of a nasty injury there. James Franklin very quickly told us in his final press conference that Drew's season was over and thus his college career is over. Pat Kraft got pretty emotional today. He got as emotional talking about this as we've ever seen him in a public setting, talking about Drew Aller. And I think it really goes to a bigger picture. James Franklin legacy has been under scrutiny lately. Drew Aller's legacy, this chapter is closed for him. He's not going to take another step. And I think a lot of people envision a legacy that looked a lot different from this. It envisioned him helping James Franklin get over the hump in some of those important matchups. They envisioned him being the kind of quarterback who can maybe compete for a Heisman Trophy, compete to be one of the top players off the board in the NFL draft, that the primary position that everyone's focused on. And yet it didn't work out that way for Drew Aller. I think there was a real defensive nature in Pat Kraft's answer and kind of rallying around Drew a bit. What did you pick up from his response regarding Drew Aller? And what do you make of how this young man's going to be viewed moving forward? Because we know Christian Hackenberg has his own reputation from his career. So does Trace McSorley. So does Sean Clifford. All these quarterbacks are evaluated differently by the fan base. And now we're at a punctuation mark when it comes to number 15.
Yeah, the one time that Kraft got emotional that we did see was at when his introductory conference. I think he was asked about his father or something, and so I'm not bringing that up as a correction, but only that's what this kid kind of means to him. That, I mean, he was literally on the verge of tears. We have the video posted. I said this on our TV show that we taped on Sunday, that whatever you think about Drew Aller as a player being able to produce in the clutch, I just hope nobody ever questions his toughness and what he was willing to do for the team and how he was willing, even though he wasn't the greatest runner, and it ended up, hurting him in the long run, which is unfortunate, that he was just tough as hell on the field. Could he be emotional after games? Yeah, sure, he could be emotional, but during a game, never, ever, ever question this guy's toughness and heart. I mean, I thought he was out there doing, sometimes not making the best plays, but always giving the best effort, if that makes sense. And I think that's what Kraft was getting at. And I think that's why it hurts Kraft to see some of the criticism that Drew Aller has gotten. And what did he say? You don't know what the hell you're talking about or something. I forget what the exact word is. I don't have it up here. But, I mean, he was emotional. He was fiery. It's weird because we knew he had a good relationship with James Franklin, and he wasn't like a fraction of emotional about that. I guess you can't be when you're in those shoes and when you're making those decisions. But with Aller, it really touched him. And for Drew, like I said, I hope he's just remembered as, first of all, he hasn't died. I just hope he's remembered as a player who was just super tough and did what the best that he could do to get Penn State where he hoped that they would be, even though it didn't work out all the time.
I think in some ways he finished his career looking a lot like the sophomore quarterback who first played against Michigan, who first played against Ohio State, especially in those spotlight games. He kind of looked like the same guy 2 years down the road, 20 starts down the road. I think that's frustrating for people, most of all Drew Aller himself. And Pat Kraft says he'll be a hell of a pro quarterback at the next level. He'll get a chance to meet with NFL teams, and once he's healthy to physically do some stuff, hopefully we'll see him at Penn State's Pro Day next spring. But for now, the beat rolls on with Ethan Grunkemeyer at quarterback. And last you saw him, he got in for a 4th and short with Penn State's season on the line and maybe James Franklin's career on the line at Penn State. And what a position to put that young man in. But that's what QB2 life is like. Didn't work out well in that occasion. We saw some better moments from Ethan Grunkemeyer early in the season when he got involved at the end of some blowouts in non-conference play. Before that, he got his feet wet a bit on a really cold day in Beaver Stadium against SMU in their first-round playoff victory. But Daniel, the curtain really rises on the redshirt freshman now. Let's remind folks he is from the same quarterback trainer, Brad Mendler, that Drew Aller worked with in Ohio. Him and Drew had a lot of workout sessions together beyond Penn State practice facility before Ethan got to campus. And now it's his turn to show what he can do. And we talked about on Sunday how many coaches on this staff and maybe how many players on this staff are auditioning for 2026 opportunities. This is the guy that's first and foremost in that position. Is he going to be someone you're going to kind of cling to and say he's our quarterback moving forward? Or do you say we got to look in the transfer portal very seriously? Ethan Grunkemeyer has a chance to show what he's about. And Terry Smith had a pretty good line on this one.
Yeah, Terry Smith said that, he and Grunkemeyer, they're in the same spot right now that going into this, which is pretty funny to think about with the quarterback and the cornerbacks coach, backup quarterback, cornerbacks coach. Suddenly they're in the same spot. They're tied together at the hip moving forward. I do think that something else that we joked about a little bit after the press conference where, when we were writing all the stuff about Grunkemeyer on Saturday night, we had to go back in and put those caveats because it wasn't technically confirmed that he was going to be the guy moving forward. But Terry Smith came out and I think gave him a pretty hearty endorsement today moving forward. This is going to be an interesting subplot. I do think that when you talk about different guys auditioning and what's at stake for individual players moving forward, it's easy to talk about the guys with NFL futures and having that as a motivating factor. For Grunkemeyer, I mean, it's, will the coach who comes in want him to be his quarterback? Will he rise to this occasion? Will he need to look elsewhere after this year? There's just, I think, a lot riding on it for him. And we're going to learn a lot about him. I think that all three of us had, I think, a decent amount of exposure to him on the recruiting trail, through camps, through the podcast. I was out in Ohio and saw him play. I think he's someone that is wired in a good way. Maybe doesn't strike you as the most rah as maybe Aller did. I think I remember getting off the one Zoom we had with Grunkemeyer after the Nevada game, and it felt like he felt like a little flat, but it was in that way where it was his heart rate didn't change the whole time throughout. So I think he has the potential to be one of these guys that didn't necessarily show when he came in against Northwestern, but doesn't necessarily get flustered. Doesn't really show that. Going to Kinnick, it's going to be interesting. But in terms of grading on the backup quarterback curve, I think he'll have a pretty good head start as he goes out there and attempts to take his first snap.
And just because he's now one snap away or one decision away, you've got Iowa native Jackson Smolik as QB2 for Friday or Saturday night out at Kinnick Stadium. And you talked about that heart rate staying steady. You could use that in underneath the lights of Kinnick Stadium on Friday. That steadiness would be very important. Guys, before we wrap up here and say goodbye, I want to direct people to something I wrote at Lions247.com regarding some interactions with James Franklin during my 9 seasons covering the team. Just interactions that had nothing to do with touchdowns, turnovers, wins, losses, what a lot of people see in the spotlight, some things around campus, some things when we ran into each other in different spots, and just some kind of interactions that you really just wouldn't ever know existed with James Franklin. I think so many people are obsessed right now with who he is as a football coach, but I also wanted to put the human label on him a little bit, Mark, and I wanted to give you a chance because, again, Daniel and I spent a lot of time bouncing around James Franklin topics. Anything you'd like to share about James, because you covered him longer than me or Daniel, and I feel like I've covered him a long time. He's been a big part of my life. He's always looming in the background since I moved here because there's always the next James Franklin press conference or the next practice availability, and much of what we do is tethered to what James Franklin is going to tell us. And so, Mark, anything to share now that we've kind of put everything else out there about the change and what it means for the program?
Yeah, a couple things. Early in his tenure here, I complained about something at Big Ten Media Days, that Penn State wasn't getting the same kind of timing that the Ohio States and Michigans were getting, in terms of Ohio State and Michigan would have the coaches available at one point and then the players at another. And for Penn State, they were overlapping, and there was some miscommunication that he heard what I had said and thought I was complaining about Penn State. And I hear this and I'm like, no, I wasn't complaining about Penn State. I was complaining about the Big Ten. And he goes, well, we should talk about this at some point. Let's go out for lunch. And we ended up going out for lunch, and I explained all that, and we told each other about each other's families and whatnot. So it was a pretty cool thing that I hadn't really experienced with anybody other than maybe Jerry Dunn, a Penn State basketball coach. Tyler, I know you probably have a similar story, but when Scout, when I was at FightOnState.com, which is still part of our name technically, when Scout went bankrupt, he called me. I mean, he was like, "Is everything going to be okay for you and your family?" And we heard so much early in his career, used car salesman, blah blah blah, and I just wanted to put that human part out there. That's not what a used car salesman does. I wasn't with the biggest media outlet. I mean, I'm not a big name, you know what I mean? And this guy took time out of his day to make sure that I was going to be okay. And I was, because we ended up merging with 247 and everything ended up being just fine. And then the last thing I would say is Caleb Williams, when he was at Penn State camp, I think he was a senior or a junior. This is when Landon Tangwell was in 8th grade. He's at Penn State camp at a team camp, and Grace, my daughter, must have been 15, and she got an unbelievable photo of him. And the next day there was another camp, not a team camp, and Franklin went up to my daughter and said, "That was a great photo." And I'm getting emotional now. I mean, to have somebody like that. I mean, you have a kid, right? You know,
yeah.
It meant the world to her. I mean, it was something. So it was time. I mean, it was time for him to go, but he's a good person. He's a good man. I just want people to know that. I'm sorry. When I talk about my kid, it's tough.
I hear you, man. And I've told the story. I talked about it Sunday, and he was in the stadium actually on Saturday. My godson, I mean, he was 6 months old. It was a pretty dire straits. It was a terrible verdict from the doctors on where he was. And James Franklin kept checking in. He pulled me aside after practice one day, brought up his daughter Addison undergoing what she had to for sickle cell anemia as a kid, and what that meant to spend all that time in the hospital. And he kept checking in. And when I lost my job before I came here at 24/7 Sports, he was one of the first people other than my dad who I talked to on the phone, because he called me and said, "Is there anything I can do?" And I said, "I don't think so, but I appreciate you for checking in." And this was 2018. And within a few weeks, I was working again for 24/7 Sports, and the beat went on. But yeah, that's significant. And I'll just note as well, we had a really fun moment with him, and I referenced this on the message board. Probably the best moment collectively on the beat, and this is a little bit more of a lighthearted note, but we after the Rutgers game in 2018 in Piscataway, we're in the visitor media area inside Rutgers Stadium, and we're walking in there, and someone had their laptop out, and they're streaming the end of this epic Maryland-Ohio State matchup. It ended up being won by Ohio State 52-51 in overtime. There was like 2 or 3 minutes left. Everything's hanging in the balance. James walks in with Chris Peterson, the media SID, and we're all just – James is like, "Should we maybe wait to do this until the game's over?" And so we're like, "Yeah, sure." And he comes and sits down with us, and I shared a picture on Lions 24/7 and on my Twitter account of him making this like big like face of expression. We're all – I don't know what the moment was, a touchdown or a turnover, but we're all reacting in real time. And it was pretty cool to look back at that moment, because the game ended. Ohio State won. He went to the podium. We asked questions. He answered them. But it was a moment that stuck with me, and it was a while ago, and I think we all have our own stories. Daniel, I do want to open the mic to you for just a moment. It feels like a eulogy moment. But we're just a month away from him calling you handsome in public. But I know you've been here a little bit less. I know you don't have children, and it hits some of us in a different way when we have the kids, as people can probably hear. But anything you want to pass along here? Because I promise when we come back and we do this show later in the week, James Franklin's just not going to be as much of a topic of conversation for us moving forward. That's the way it is. Life rolls on. But I do want to give you a chance here too, Daniel.
Yeah, we're really going in descending order of how meaningful things are. But no, I mean, I think that, I haven't been doing this very long at Penn State. And I also, joined at a very interesting time in terms of coming out of COVID. So I'm pretty sure I didn't have my first in-person availability with Franklin until I'd been up here for 6 months or something already. Like there's a lot of virtual stuff going on, and different situation. But I think it is there's kind of a long tail to some of these things, especially when guys coach for so long. You can really draw these different corrections. Like my first favorite football player in real life that I saw play in real life was this guy, Scooter Monroe, John Carroll School, class of probably 98, 99. He was coached by James Franklin at Maryland. And then, I was a student when Franklin's last year's offensive coordinator there, which is kind of crazy to think about. In 2015, I'm asking Franklin questions on the Big Ten conference call before a Maryland game at M&T Bank Stadium. There's just different ways that these different things crisscross. I don't know if it's technically accidentally breaking news or what, but out at the opening, Solomon Ennis is telling me that James Franklin got a contract extension, which I did not realize. I was out to dinner and didn't realize it was kicking up a little bit of a storm back home in Happy Valley while I was out in Portland. There's just these different things where you're kind of it's okay, I was here for 5 years, my 5th year on the beat, But in terms of knowing a Franklin and, different connections and tangents, like it just goes back really far, which I think is a really unique thing about this business and just sports in general. I do think that with Franklin, like if you're around a lot and you keep showing up, and you build up that mutual respect, like it generates a little bit of a relationship. Like we were at that state I game, Mark and I, earlier this year, and he walks right by me, gives me the big handshake, slaps me on the back. I never had the type of serious conversation with him that the two of you had, but it did feel like over time that I was someone that suddenly there was a level of comfort of seeing me there and looking out into a press scrum at Big Ten Media Days, and I'm a familiar face now. Obviously, it's hard to forget this face, but
it's so handsome.
Yeah, and so it's just kind of, it's been reflecting a little bit on how things had progressed over my time, and I think it's a good example of relationships, things like that. I think the one thing that I do really respect about him, and I felt like I understood about him, is that taking your job really seriously and the approach and just knowing that every single day is important with what you're doing. I think that's the one thing with different coaches I've been around that I really respect, is that the understanding that I only really get one shot at this to do it right, to do it the way that I want to do it. And I've been around coaches where that's been really obvious, and I haven't always agreed with that, and the methods that leads to, but I think I understand it and I respect that. And so I think overall, I enjoyed covering James Franklin these past couple of years, and it felt really different today, being in there and that time at noon, and it's the muscle memory. And I can't imagine for Tyler, you've been doing it as long as you have. Mark, you've been here the whole time. Suddenly it's a little different. It's kind of jarring.
Yeah. And you mentioned the comfort level that can be provided when the head coach is kind of recognizing your work and treating you with respect. And my first time in Penn State's practice facilities, June 2017, I didn't even have a house to live yet. I don't think my wife had even been to campus yet. But I showed up. I was on the sideline, didn't know where anything was. But James Franklin's walking like 30 yards away, going in a different direction. We kind of meet eyes by accident, and he pivots, runs over to me, sticks out his hand, looks me in the eyes, and says, "Welcome to State College. I'm James Franklin." And I thought about that a little bit last night when I was writing that story. And that's something, it's just, I'll tell you this, I'll put it out there. I returned the favor. He called me when I lost my job. We connected since he lost his. I thought that was the right thing to do. And so we wish him well in whatever's next. And I think as we gain some distance away from a really emotional situation here for a lot of people, I do think that his legacy and whatever he did here and the efforts he put in will be viewed more favorably than how they're being viewed and discussed right now by a lot of people, because it's a passionate moment for a lot of people involved.
Well,
so
the
Mark,
loss isn't the close games, man. I mean,
that's
why it's it's resonating with people so much, because so many of them happened so recently. Hey, one last thing, we have to mention how Terry Smith left the stage today, because to me that was an all-time classic. I mean, he could not have put a finer ending on his opening press conference as interim head coach than what he did. Do you want me to explain it?
Go for it.
So I never plug my camera into the malt box, which is the house feed of the audio, because sometimes you can't hear the questions if you don't have the microphone. And then when the coach goes to leave, like many times Franklin would either joke or say something serious or whatever on his way out the door. That's something that occurred to him. So I always keep it running until he actually got out the door. And I did that with Terry Smith, and he steps up and he said, paused for a second and then said, "Everyone pray for me." Right? Am I?
Yeah.
To me, to end it on a good note, it was pretty funny that we've gone through all this serious stuff the last couple of days, and serious, relatively speaking. None of this is life and death, and I get emotional talking about my daughter. That's what gets to me. But for Terry to put that point on it, I thought was just a tremendous way to end the day.
Man, he said it with a smile. We'll just make sure people understand that. So, hey, really appreciate it, guys. I think we got a little bit more vulnerable than we anticipated on this show, but that's okay. I think that it shows you a little bit about the how we're inside a lot of this stuff, and we're at every event, and we don't miss anything, and you start to build relationships, and so we'll start to build new ones.
Don't making fun of me afterward. You know.
But we will be back with you again. I will circle back with folks on the podcast here midweek. We'll get Tyler Calvaruso, our recruiting insider, to let you know what the hell is happening with recruiting, because that is a minute-by-minute conversation right now. We'll also look ahead to the Iowa matchup with one of our really strong insiders here, David Eichholt, who covers the Hawkeyes for our 24/7 Sports Network. He'll hop on with me, and then we'll get back with you later in the week after looking at practice and giving you some final thoughts on this matchup. But business as usual at Lions247.com. Hop on in for 60% off right now as we deal with a lot of comings and goings in the weeks and months ahead. For now, stepping aside on behalf of Mark and Daniel, I'm Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.